My younger, golden brother ruined my life. My wife betrayed me with him, and my mother sided with my brother. Only my father supported me. Hi Reddit, I'm Jack, and I feel like my childhood could be ripped straight out of some tragic soap opera. I don't know why I'm even writing this, but maybe putting it all out there will help me sort through the mess my family made of me. I grew up as the oldest of 3 brothers. There's me, Alex, the middle one, and Liam, the youngest. My mom adored Alex. She showered him with affection, gave him anything he wanted, and made him feel like he walked on water. As for me, I was just there. The oldest, the responsible one. Liam got the baby treatment, Alex got the golden child status, and I got the crumbs. I guess someone had to, right? The favoritism wasn't subtle. If Alex broke something, I got blamed. If Alex wanted the last piece of pie, my mom would slide it onto his plate without a second thought. Even when we were little, I was conditioned to just step aside. And Alex? He knew it. He weaponized it. The worst part wasn't even the neglect. It was Alex himself. He had this way of making everything about him and tearing me down in the process. I don't know if he was just jealous or if he got off on seeing me miserable, but he made my life a living hell. He called me names: loser, idiot, worthless. Sometimes he got creative, like Jack the Joke. Once, when I tried to defend myself, he grinned and said, "Don't worry, Mom doesn't care about you enough to notice." And the stealing, God, the stealing. Anything I liked or valued would vanish, only to reappear in Alex's room, stuffed into his drawers or flaunted like it was his all along. My favorite baseball glove? Gone. The Lego spaceship I spent months building? Dismantled. My birthday money? He once took $20 from my wallet and had the audacity to tell me I must have lost it because I'm so careless. My mom backed him up without missing a beat. But nothing compared to the night Alex took things too far. I was maybe 12, Alex 10. We shared a room because, according to Mom, it's important for brothers to bond. Bonding, to Alex, meant torment. One evening, I was reading a book, an escape I treasured, when Alex stormed in. He looked off. His grin was too wide, his eyes sparkling with some cruel idea. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he sneered. I didn't even look up. "Not now, Alex." He grabbed the book from my hands and threw it across the room. Before I could react, he lunged at me and shoved me onto the bed. I shoved back, but he scrambled to my nightstand and grabbed the lighter I'd hidden there. I'd found it on the playground and stupidly thought it was cool to keep around. "Let's see how much you care about your stupid hair," he said, flicking the flame to life. Before I could process the threat, he was holding the lighter up to my head. The flame licked the tips of my hair, and the smell of burning filled the air. I screamed and slapped the lighter out of his hand. My dad burst into the room moments later, furious. He saw the scorch marks on my hair and demanded to know what happened. Alex, of course, played innocent, but for the first time, my dad didn't buy it. He glared at Alex, his voice low and deadly. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Alex stammered, but Dad wasn't having it. He grabbed Alex by the arm and dragged him out of the room. I didn't know what happened after that, but Alex didn't speak to me for a week. Not out of guilt. He just sulked like the whole world had wronged him. For a while, things cooled down. Alex seemed almost scared of me after Dad intervened, which was a first. I finally felt like I could breathe, like maybe I wasn't entirely alone in this family. Dad started checking in on me more, asking about school, helping me with my homework. It wasn't much, but it was something. Of course, Mom hated it. She thought Dad was babying me. She'd scoff when he asked me how I was doing, or she'd interrupt us with something Alex needed. It was like she couldn't stand seeing me get even an ounce of attention. Alex noticed too. He started acting out, throwing tantrums whenever Dad spent time with me. Mom always took his side. "You know how sensitive Alex is," she'd say, as if that excused everything. Dad, thankfully, didn't budge. He told her flat out, "Jack needs me too." It wasn't a perfect fix. Alex still found ways to dig at me, but now I had a lifeline. For once, I wasn't completely alone. Looking back, I realized how much of Alex's behavior was fueled by my mom. She made him feel untouchable, like he could do no wrong. Whenever I tried to tell her what Alex had done, She'd roll her eyes or laugh it off. Boys will be boys, she'd say. Or worse, what did you do to make him so mad? One time, when Alex took my bike for a joyride and left it at the park overnight, I confronted him in front of her. Mom, he took my bike again. She just shrugged. Maybe you should keep a better eye on your things. It wasn't just her indifference. It was the way she actively encouraged him to see me as less than him. She'd tell him he was special, that he had so much potential, that I should learn a thing or two from him. It was like she was pouring gasoline on an already raging fire. There's so much more I could say, but I'll stop here for now. Writing this has brought up a lot of memories I've tried to bury. Growing up in my house felt like a constant battle, and I was always outnumbered. If it hadn't been for my dad stepping in when he did, I don't know how much worse things would have gotten. I met Jessica during my second year at university. She was one of those people who lit up a room the moment she walked in, and for someone like me, who was used to being in the background, she was mesmerizing. I remember the first time I saw her. It was at a friend's party. She was laughing at something, her head thrown back like she didn't have a care in the world. I was too nervous to talk to her that night, but fate seemed to have plans. A week later, she showed up in one of my classes. We were assigned to the same group project, and that's how it started. Jessica had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when she talked to you. She asked me questions about my life, things I wasn't used to sharing, and I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't before. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. We started dating not long after that. It was intense, almost too good to be true. Jessica had this way of making everything feel larger than life. Dates weren't just dinners, they were adventures. A walk in the park turned into an impromptu dance under the stars. A lazy Sunday turned into a road trip to nowhere. I was head over heels before I even realized what was happening. About a year into our relationship, Jessica found out she was pregnant. I won't lie, I panicked. We were still in school, living off ramen and coffee, and the idea of raising a child felt impossible. But Jessica was so calm about it. She said, "We'll figure it out," and somehow, I believed her. We got married in a small courthouse ceremony a month later. It wasn't the wedding of anyone's dreams, but it felt right at the time. I thought we were building a life together. For a while, things were good. Better than good. Jessica gave birth to our daughter, Lily, and I fell in love with being a dad. Holding that tiny, squirming bundle in my arms for the first time was the closest I'd ever come to believing in miracles. We struggled, of course. I took on part-time jobs while finishing my degree, and Jessica stayed home with Lily. Money was tight, and we had our share of arguments, but it felt like we were in it together. It wasn't until years later that the cracks started to show. Or maybe they were always there, and I just didn't want to see them. The first clue that something was wrong came out of nowhere. I was cleaning up the living room one evening when Jessica's phone buzzed on the coffee table. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but this time, a message preview popped up. It was from someone named Mike. "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again?" I froze. My stomach dropped, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling. The message stared back at me, a taunting confirmation of my worst fears. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but what other explanation could there be? When Jessica came into the room, I confronted her. She looked at me with wide eyes, her face a mask of shock and indignation. "You went through my phone?" she asked, her voice rising. She didn't deny it right away, didn't explain the message. Instead, she turned it around on me, like I was the one who had done something wrong. Eventually, she admitted it. She said it was just a fling, something that didn't mean anything. She swore it was over, that it had been a mistake, and begged me to forgive her. I wanted to believe her. For Lily's sake, for the life we had built, I wanted to believe this was just a horrible, one-time lapse in judgment. But it wasn't. A few months later, I started noticing other things. Jessica would disappear for hours without explanation. She'd say she was running errands, but when I asked what errands, her answers were vague. She started dressing up more, spending extra time on her hair and makeup for a quick trip to the store. There were nights when she'd come home smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. One night, I followed her. I felt like a stalker, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. She told me she was meeting a friend for dinner, but when I saw her get into a car with another man, my heart shattered. They drove to a bar on the other side of town, laughing and touching like they were the only two people in the world. I didn't confront her that night. I sat in my car, watching them through the window, feeling a mix of rage and heartbreak that I couldn't put into words. When she came home, she acted like everything was normal, like she hadn't just torn my world apart. The next day, I confronted her again. This time, she didn't deny it. She told me his name was Ryan, that they had met at a gym she'd recently joined. She said she didn't know why she did it, that she felt trapped in our marriage, like she needed an escape. I asked her if she ever thought about what this would do to me, to Lily. She just cried and said she didn't know how to stop. I tried to make it work. I wanted to believe we could get past it, that she could change. We went to counseling, but every session felt like a performance. Jessica said all the right things, made all the right promises, but it always felt hollow. I started to realize that I wanted to fix our marriage more than she did. The final straw came when I found out about a second affair. This time, it wasn't a message or a lingering suspicion. Jessica came clean, sort of. She admitted to sleeping with a coworker, but only because she thought I already knew. When I asked her why, she just shrugged and said, "I don't know. I guess I was bored." That was it. That was the moment I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I packed a bag and left that night. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Looking back, I don't know how I didn't see it sooner. Jessica was always good at putting on a show, at making me believe things were better than they were. Maybe I just wanted so badly to have a family that I ignored all the warning signs. Or maybe I was just scared to admit that the person I loved wasn't who I thought she was. These days, I'm focused on Lily. She's the one good thing to come out of all of this, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she grows up knowing she's loved. As for Jessica, I don't know what the future holds. Part of me still hopes she'll change, but I've learned not to count on it. When Jessica admitted to her second affair, I thought I had hit rock bottom. I couldn't imagine anything more devastating than the betrayal I had already endured. But life has a cruel way of proving you wrong. What I didn't realize then was that there was another truth lurking beneath the surface, one that would make everything else pale in comparison. It started with Jessica asking to talk. That phrase alone had become a trigger for me, a warning that something was about to shatter. I sat across from her at the dining table, my hands gripping the edge as if bracing for impact. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice trembling. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." I didn't respond. What was there to say? After everything she had already confessed, I didn't think I had the capacity to be shocked anymore. I was wrong. Her next words came out in a rush, like she was desperate to get them out before she lost her nerve. "I've been having an affair with Alex." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Alex? My brother, Alex? The same Alex who had tormented me throughout my childhood, who had taken every opportunity to make my life miserable. I stared at her, unable to process what she had just said. "You're joking," I managed to choke out, though I knew she wasn't. "I'm not," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's been going on for years." The room seemed to tilt around me. Years. She didn't just betray me with a stranger or some fleeting fling. She had betrayed me with my own brother, the one person who should have been off limits, no matter what. I pushed back my chair and stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. "How could you?" I shouted, my voice breaking. "How could you do this to me? To Lily?" She sobbed into her hands, but her tears only fueled my anger. "You don't understand," she said, her voice muffled. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly. "Go this far? What does that even mean? How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, and I could see the war in her eyes, whether to tell me the full truth or try to minimize the damage. Finally, she whispered, "Since before Lily was born." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, leaning against the wall for support. Lily, my daughter, the one bright spot in all of this darkness. My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't thought to connect before. Her hesitation, her avoidance, the way she had always seemed distant whenever Alex was around. Is she I couldn't finish the question, but Jessica understood. I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. She might be his. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything other than the possibility that the child I had raised and loved as my own might not be mine. Jessica begged me to stay, to work through this, but every time I looked at her, all I could see was Alex's smug face. I knew what I had to do. I ordered a paternity test. Jessica tried to talk me out of it, but there was no stopping me. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The waiting was agony. Every time Lily called me Dad, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. What if I wasn't her dad? What if she was his? The results came in 2 weeks later. I opened the envelope with shaking hands, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The words stared back at me, cold and clinical. Probability of paternity, 0%. I dropped the paper, my legs giving out beneath me. Jessica tried to console me, but I pushed her away. She had destroyed everything. My marriage, my family, my very identity. Lily wasn't mine. She was Alex's. Confronting Alex was inevitable. I drove to his house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. He answered the door with his usual cocky grin, but it faltered when he saw my expression. "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the house. He didn't even try to deny it. In fact, he seemed almost proud of what he had done. "Look, Jack," he said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I didn't plan for this to happen, but Jessica and we have a connection." "A connection?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You destroyed my marriage. You betrayed me. And Lily," my voice broke. "She's yours." He shrugged, as if it were no big deal. "What do you want me to say?" "It is what it is." I lunged at him, my fists colliding with his face. Years of pent-up anger and resentment poured out of me as I hit him over and over again. He fought back, and soon we were both on the floor, grappling like kids again. But this time it wasn't a game. It was life and death, at least, that's what it felt like. When it was over, we were both bleeding, both panting, but nothing had been resolved. He looked at me with something like pity and said, "Face it, Jack. Jessica chose me." Leaving Jessica was the hardest thing I've ever done, but staying would have been impossible. I packed my things and moved out the same night I got the paternity test results. She begged me to stay, to think about Lily, but I couldn't. I loved Lily more than anything, but knowing she wasn't mine, knowing she was Alex's, was too much to bear. For a while, I tried to keep my distance, to rebuild my life without the constant reminder of what I had lost. But Lily didn't understand. She called me, crying, asking why I wasn't around anymore. It broke my heart, but what could I say? How could I explain any of this to her? Jessica and Alex ended up together, of course. I heard through mutual friends that they moved in together not long after I left. Seeing them at family events was unbearable. My mom, predictably, took Alex's side, insisting that love is complicated and that I needed to forgive them. My dad was furious, but even he couldn't do much to change the dynamic. I don't know what the future holds. Some days, I feel like I'll never recover from this. Other days, I remind myself that I survived worse. Growing up in that house, dealing with Alex's abuse, enduring years of neglect. Maybe this is just one more battle to fight. But one thing is certain, I'll never let them break me completely. Not this time. The divorce proceedings were as messy as you'd imagine, but for me, they were more of a formality. The real separation, the moment I knew Jessica and I were over, had already happened the night I learned about her affair with Alex and the paternity of Lily. Even now, thinking back to it, there's a bitter taste in my mouth, like bile that refuses to stay down. When I filed for divorce, Jessica was shocked. I guess she thought she could manipulate me into staying, or maybe she just didn't believe I had the strength to walk away. But there was nothing left to salvage. I loved Lily, but knowing she wasn't mine had changed everything. Every time I looked at her, I saw Alex's smug face, and it tore me apart. I couldn't pretend anymore. Jessica tried every tactic in the book. She begged, cried, and screamed. She promised she'd change, that we could rebuild our life, that she'd never see Alex again. It was all lies, of course. She and Alex had already moved in together by the time the ink was dry on the divorce papers. I think she just wanted to keep the facade alive a little longer. The hardest part was telling Lily. She was only 6 at the time, too young to understand the full weight of what was happening. All she knew was that her dad was leaving, and in her eyes, I was abandoning her. I tried to explain as gently as I could, but how do you tell a child that you're not really their father? That the man they've called Dad their whole life is walking away? Why can't you stay? She asked, tears streaming down her face. I'll be good, I promise. I hugged her tightly, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. It's not your fault, I whispered. You didn't do anything wrong. This isn't about you. But it was about her in a way. It was about the lies surrounding her existence, about the betrayal that had ripped my life apart. I couldn't be the dad she deserved, not with Alex and Jessica's shadow looming over us. It wasn't fair to her, but it wasn't fair to me either. Breaking off contact with Alex was easier than I thought it would be. I had spent most of my life trying to keep the peace, to ignore his cruelty and manipulations for the sake of family. But this was unforgivable. I didn't tell him. I didn't make a grand declaration. I simply stopped. No calls, no texts, no visits. He was dead to me. Of course, that didn't stop him from trying to worm his way back in. Alex thrived on control, and the idea of me cutting him out probably drove him insane. He showed up at my apartment one night, pounding on the door until I opened it. He looked disheveled, almost panicked. "Come on, Jack," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You're really going to let a woman come between us? We're brothers." I laughed in his face. "You didn't care about that when you were screwing my wife." He winced, but only for a moment. Then the smugness returned, that infuriating smirk that made me want to punch him all over again. "She came to me, you know. I didn't go looking for it." I slammed the door in his face. My dad, on the other hand, was furious when he found out. He had always been the moral center of our family, the one who tried to do the right thing even when it wasn't easy. When I told him about Jessica and Alex, he didn't say much at first. He just sat there, his face turning redder by the second. "Are you sure?" he finally asked, his voice low and dangerous. I handed him the paternity test results, the cold, hard evidence of Alex's betrayal. He read it in silence, then folded the paper neatly and set it on the table. "I'll take care of it," he said, and I knew better than to argue. The next time I saw Alex was at a family dinner, the kind of forced gathering my mom insisted on to keep us all close. I hadn't planned to go, but Dad had asked me to. He didn't say why, just that it was important. Alex and Jessica were there, of course, acting like nothing had happened. Jessica avoided my gaze, but Alex was his usual self, cracking jokes and dominating the conversation. My mom doted on him as always, oblivious, or maybe willfully ignorant, of the tension in the room. Then Dad stood up. He cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice steady and calm. "As of today, Alex is no longer a part of this family." The words hung in the air, heavy and shocking. Alex's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded. "You heard me," Dad said. "You're out. You're not my son anymore. You can't do that," Alex shouted, rising to his feet. "I'm your son, your blood. You stopped being my son the moment you betrayed your brother," Dad said, his voice cold and unyielding. "You're cut out of the will. No financial support. Nothing. You're on your own." My mom gasped, clutching her chest like she was about to faint. "You can't do this," she whispered, looking between Dad and Alex. "He's your son." "No," Dad said firmly. "Not anymore." Alex stormed out, slamming the door behind him. My mom burst into tears, but Dad didn't waver. He sat back down and resumed eating, as if nothing had happened. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt empty. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was the complete unraveling of our family. The fallout was as bad as you'd expect. My mom blamed me for everything, accusing me of tearing the family apart. "If you had just forgiven him," she said one night, her voice shaking with anger, "none of this would have happened." I stared at her, incredulous. "Forgiven him? For sleeping with my wife? For fathering a child with her? Are you even hearing yourself? She didn't respond, just turned away and muttered something about keeping the peace. It was clear where her loyalty lay, and it wasn't with me. Dad, on the other hand, stood by me every step of the way. He helped me find a new apartment, lent me money when I needed it, and even offered to go to therapy with me. He said he wanted to understand what I was going through, to be the father I needed. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone was truly in my corner. Looking back, I don't know how I survived that year. The divorce, the betrayal, the family conflict, it was a storm that threatened to drown me. But somehow, I made it through. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I'm done letting Alex and Jessica dictate my life. They took enough from me already. Now, it's about rebuilding. For myself. For my future. For the peace I've been chasing my whole life. Alex tried reaching out to me a few months after Dad disowned him. At first, it was just a couple of texts, pathetic, half-hearted attempts to make me feel guilty. "We're still brothers, Jack," one of them read. "We've been through too much to throw it all away." I ignored them. What was there to say? He hadn't just crossed a line. He had obliterated it, burned it to the ground, and danced on the ashes. When I didn't respond, he started calling. I never picked up. Then came the letters, long, rambling apologies where he tried to rewrite history. He claimed he hadn't meant to hurt me, that Jessica had seduced him, that it was all some big mistake. He even threw in some self-pity for good measure, whining about how Dad cutting him off had left him with nothing. Not once did he take real responsibility for what he'd done. One day, he showed up at my door. I almost didn't recognize him at first. The cocky confidence that had defined him for so long was gone, replaced by something hollow and desperate. His clothes were wrinkled, his face unshaven. He looked like a man who had hit rock bottom and was still digging. "Jack, please," he said, his voice cracking. "Can we talk?" I stared at him through the peephole, my anger warring with a pang of pity I didn't want to feel. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice cold. "I just want to make things right," he said, wringing his hands. "I know I messed up, but I'm still your brother. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I laughed bitterly. "You're not my brother, Alex. Brothers don't do what you did." He flinched but didn't back down. "I made a mistake, okay? I wasn't thinking. Jessica and it just happened." "Stop," I snapped. "I don't want to hear your excuses. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. Over and over again. For years. And now you're here because you want me to feel sorry for you?" His shoulders sagged. "I just want a chance to fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I said, stepping back inside. "We're done, Alex. Go home to Jessica. She's all you've got now." I slammed the door before he could say anything else. As I stood there, breathing heavily, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I had spent so much of my life hating Alex, but now, seeing him like that, I realized I didn't hate him anymore. I just didn't care. Word got around about Alex's attempts at reconciliation, and soon he was trying the same act with Dad. He showed up at the house one afternoon, unannounced, and tried to guilt Dad into forgiving him. It didn't go well. "I'm your son," Alex shouted, his voice carrying through the open windows. I happened to be visiting and heard the whole thing from the living room. "You can't just throw me away." Dad's reply was calm but devastating. "You threw yourself away, Alex. I raised you better than this, and you chose to betray your own family. Don't come back here." Alex left in a fury, slamming the door so hard it rattled the walls. I looked at Dad, expecting him to be upset, but he just shook his head and went back to his crossword puzzle. "He made his bed," Dad said quietly. "Now he has to lie in it." Meanwhile, Jessica and Alex were struggling. Losing Dad's financial support hit Alex hard. He had always relied on the safety net Dad provided, and without it, he was floundering. He tried to get a job, but his resume was unimpressive, and his reputation had taken a hit. Word of his betrayal had spread through our extended family, and it wasn't long before it reached his professional circles as well. People didn't want to work with someone who couldn't be trusted. Jessica wasn't faring much better. She had been a stay-at-home mom for most of our marriage, and while she tried to re-enter the workforce, her skills were outdated. She picked up a part-time job at a local diner, but it wasn't enough to cover their bills. They ended up moving into a tiny, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town. It was a far cry from the comfortable life they had once enjoyed. The walls were thin, the plumbing barely worked, and the neighbors were loud and often drunk. I heard all of this through mutual acquaintances, though I tried not to dwell on it. It wasn't my problem anymore. One day, out of the blue, I ran into Jessica at the grocery store. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. She was pushing a cart with Lily sitting in the front seat, oblivious to the tension between us. "Jack," Jessica said, her voice filled with surprise and something else. "Regret, maybe." "Hi." I nodded curtly. "Jessica." For a moment, we just stood there, the silence heavy and awkward. Then Lily looked up at me and smiled. "Hi, Daddy." My heart broke all over again. I didn't correct her. How could I? Instead, I forced a smile and said, "Hi, Lily." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away. "She misses you," she said softly. "We both do." I ignored the comment. "How are you?" I asked instead, keeping my tone neutral. "We're managing," she said, though the bags under her eyes told a different story. "Alex is working nights, and I'm picking up extra shifts where I can." "Good for you," I said, though I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. I didn't know her sympathy. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. "I know you hate me," she said suddenly, her voice trembling, "and I don't blame you. But Lily, she still needs you." I looked at her, torn between anger and sorrow. "You made sure I couldn't be a part of her life, Jessica. That's on you." Before she could respond, Lily started fussing, and Jessica had to turn her attention back to the cart. I took the opportunity to leave. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the image of Lily's smiling face. No matter how much I tried to distance myself, a part of me would always love her. But love wasn't enough to fix what had been broken. These days, I hear about Alex and Jessica through the grapevine. They're still together, though barely holding on. Their financial struggles have only gotten worse, and their relationship is showing cracks under the pressure. Alex, I'm told, has started drinking more, and Jessica seems to spend most of her time at work. They're raising Lily, but from what I hear, it's more out of necessity than love. They need each other to survive, but that's about it. As for me, I'm moving forward. Slowly, painfully, but forward nonetheless. I've learned that some wounds never fully heal, but you can still live with the scars. And as much as I've lost, I've gained something too. A sense of clarity, of self-worth, of knowing what I will and won't tolerate. Alex and Jessica are living in the wreckage they created. I'm building something new. And for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that. Life after the divorce felt like waking up from a nightmare, only to realize I had no idea how to start living again. For months, I was stuck in survival mode, just going through the motions. Wake up, work, sleep, repeat. There were days when I'd sit on the couch staring at the wall, wondering how everything had fallen apart so completely. But somewhere in that fog, I decided I didn't want to stay stuck. I didn't want Alex and Jessica to have that kind of power over me anymore. If they were going to ruin my marriage, my family, and my sense of self, they weren't going to take my future too. So, I started clawing my way out of the pit. It wasn't easy. The first step was therapy, and to be honest, I hated it at first. Sitting across from a stranger and pouring out all the ugly, messy parts of my life felt like peeling off my skin. My therapist, Dr. Michelle Carter, was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a knack for calling me out on my bullshit. During one session, I was venting about Jessica and Alex, how they had destroyed everything I cared about. Dr. Carter listened patiently before cutting me off mid-rant. "Jack, do you want to spend the rest of your life letting them control your happiness?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. I didn't know how to respond. "Of course not," I said after a moment. "Then stop giving them so much space in your head," she said. "They don't deserve it." It was a turning point for me. I realized I'd been holding onto my anger like it was a lifeline, but all it was doing was dragging me down. Letting go didn't mean forgiving them. It meant choosing to focus on myself instead of the people who had hurt me. Work became my escape, my therapy in its own way. I threw myself into my career with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I had been working as a project manager at a small tech firm, but after the divorce, I started taking on bigger projects, volunteering for leadership roles, and building connections in the industry. It paid off. Within a year, I was promoted to a senior position with a significant pay raise. The job kept me busy, which was exactly what I needed. I started traveling more for work, attending conferences and networking events in cities I'd never been to before. It was a chance to reinvent myself, to step out of the shadow of my old life and figure out who I was on my own. I met new people, colleagues, mentors, even a few who became friends, but I kept my personal life guarded. I wasn't ready to let anyone in that deeply. My relationship with my parents changed in ways I didn't expect. My dad and I grew closer after the divorce. He understood what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you loved. He'd been dealing with Alex's betrayal in his own way. We started having regular dinners, just the two of us, where we talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes we'd reminisce about the past, but more often we'd focus on the present, on rebuilding. My mom, on the other hand, was a different story. She had always been Alex's biggest supporter, and while she never outright defended what he did, she couldn't bring herself to fully condemn him either. At first, this drove a wedge between us. I couldn't understand how she could still hold onto loyalty for someone who had destroyed so much. But over time, I realized that she wasn't going to change, and I had to decide if I could accept that. With Dr. Carter's help, I set boundaries. I told my mom that I wouldn't discuss Alex with her, that I didn't want to hear about his life or his struggles. To her credit, she respected that. It was awkward at first, but eventually, we found a way to coexist without letting the topic of Alex poison our relationship. As for Alex himself, he became a ghost in our family. No one mentioned his name, not even Mom. He stopped showing up at family events, and if anyone still spoke to him, they didn't admit it. I heard through the grapevine that he and Jessica were still together, struggling to make ends meet. Part of me wanted to gloat, to revel in their misery, but another part of me just felt tired. They weren't my problem anymore. Outside of work and therapy, I started exploring hobbies I hadn't touched in years. I picked up photography, something I'd loved in college but had let slip during my marriage. There was something healing about capturing the world through a lens, finding beauty in the smallest details. A leaf caught in the wind, a beam of sunlight breaking through the clouds. It reminded me that there was still good in the world, even if my own life had been filled with so much pain. I also started going to the gym, not so much to get in shape, but to have something to focus on, a goal I could control. The physical effort, the act of pushing myself, felt cathartic. I wasn't just building muscle, I was rebuilding myself. People sometimes asked if I was dating again, and the answer was always no. I wasn't ready, and I didn't know if I ever would be. The idea of trusting someone that deeply again felt impossible. Jessica had shattered my faith in love, and while I was working on healing, I knew it was a long road. That said, I wasn't lonely. I had my work, my hobbies, and a small but solid group of friends I had made through therapy and networking. One of them, a guy named Eric, had gone through a divorce of his own and became something of a confidant. We'd grab drinks after work and swap war stories, laughing at the absurdity of it all. It wasn't the same as having a partner, but it was enough for now. The most unexpected part of my journey came during a family gathering at Dad's house. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, just me, Dad, and Mom sitting in the backyard. We were talking about old family vacations when Dad suddenly said, "I'm proud of you, Jack." I looked at him, surprised. "For what?" "For not letting this break you," he said. "For moving forward." It hit me then just how far I'd come. A year ago, I had been drowning in anger and grief, unable to see a way out. Now, I was building something new, a life that was mine, untainted by Alex and Jessica's betrayal. It wasn't perfect, and I still had a lot of healing to do, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on solid ground. Life after the divorce wasn't what I had planned or wanted, but it was a second chance. A chance to figure out who I was, what I wanted, and what I was capable of. I don't know what the future holds, and maybe that's okay. For now, I'm focused on the present, on living, on growing, on finding peace. And that's enough.